Alien girl thought she wasn't breeding material until a human's compliment changed everything. Lieutenant Commander Dylan Summers wiped sweat from his brow as he stripped off his regulation undershirt in the small maintenance room of Orbital Station Helios. The environmental controls in this section had been malfunctioning for days, leaving the cramped service areas sweltering and uncomfortable. After 6 hours of running diagnostics on the station's defense grid, all he wanted was a moment of privacy to change into a fresh uniform before heading to the officer's mess. "Goddamn consortium engineers," he muttered, tossing the sweat-soaked shirt into his duffel bag. "Can't even keep the damn air conditioning working properly." At 34, Dylan was in his prime, the result of rigorous military training and a disciplined fitness regimen. His muscular frame bore the scars of numerous combat engagements, each one a testament to humanity's tenacious fight for recognition among the galactic community. He ran a hand through his dark hair, still damp from exertion, and stroked his neatly trimmed beard thoughtfully. The door behind him hissed open without warning. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize anyone was..." The voice cut off abruptly. Dylan spun around, instinctively reaching for a sidearm that wasn't there, only to find himself face to face with a Piran female. Her bright red skin seemed to glow under the harsh fluorescent lighting, and her large blue eyes were wide with surprise, and something else he couldn't quite identify. Long, fleshy tendrils that served as hair quivered slightly around her face, betraying her emotional state. "Shit," Dylan cursed, grabbing his clean shirt and holding it awkwardly in front of his bare chest. "Doesn't anyone knock on this station?" The Piran remained frozen in the doorway, her athletic form accentuated by form-fitting gray and white exercise wear. She was slender but curved in all the right places. Not that Dylan was looking. Much. I apologize, Commander," she stammered, her tendrils rippling in what he recognized as embarrassment. The maintenance terminal indicated this room was unoccupied. Dylan relaxed slightly, lowering his shirt. "No harm done, just startled me, is all." The alien woman seemed unable to tear her gaze away from him, her eyes traveling over his torso with undisguised curiosity. Dylan had encountered enough non-humans to recognize appreciation when he saw it, regardless of species. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Summer," he offered, extending a hand in the human gesture of greeting. "Dylan Summers, Earth Defense Force." The Piran hesitated before stepping forward to accept his handshake. Her skin was warm and slightly textured against his palm. "Nylara Taveri," she replied, her voice melodious despite her obvious discomfort. "Botanical Sciences Division?" "Ah, a plant expert," Dylan smiled, releasing her hand. "That explains why I haven't seen you around the military section." Nylara nodded, her tendrils settling into a more relaxed pattern. "I've been stationed here for 3 standard cycles, working on adaptive agriculture for mixed atmosphere colonies." An awkward silence fell between them as Dylan became acutely aware that he was still shirtless. He cleared his throat and quickly pulled on his Clean uniform top. "Well, I should probably..." he began. "Yes, of course," Nylara interrupted, backing toward the door. "I'll find another maintenance terminal. Again, my apologies for the intrusion." As she turned to leave, Dylan caught a glimpse of her expression, a mixture of embarrassment and something that looked remarkably like longing. He'd seen that look before on human women, but never expected to encounter it on an alien face. "No problem," he called after her retreating form. "See you around, Nylara." The door slid shut, leaving Dylan alone once more. He shook his head, chuckling softly to himself. The universe was full of surprises, like a red-skinned alien woman checking him out in a maintenance room. Little did he know that this chance encounter would be the first of many, each one drawing them closer together in ways neither could have anticipated. Nylara hurried down the corridor, her heart pounding in her chest. Her tendrils coiled and uncoiled in agitation as she replayed the embarrassing encounter in her mind. "By the eternal gardens," she whispered to herself, "what must he think of me?" But more troubling than her social faux pas was her visceral reaction to the human male. She had seen humans before, of course. The station housed several dozen of them, but never up close, and certainly never in a state of undress. The sight of his muscular form, so different from the males of her own species, had awakened something primal within her. "He's so strong and handsome," she thought. "He'd be the perfect mating partner." She immediately chastised herself for such thoughts. But there's no way someone like him would ever choose someone as strange and unattractive as me. Nylara had always been considered odd-looking by her own people. Her skin was a shade too bright, her tendrils too long and expressive, her frame too slender to bear healthy offspring according to traditional Pyrrhian standards. She had long ago accepted that she wasn't breeding material, as her mother had so bluntly put it. Yet the way the human, Dylan, had looked at her, it wasn't disgust or even mere politeness. There had been genuine interest in his eyes, however brief. "Don't be ridiculous," she muttered, entering her quarters and collapsing onto her sleeping platform. He was just being diplomatic. Humans are known for that. Still, as she drifted off to sleep that night, her dreams were filled with images of dark hair, a neatly trimmed beard, and eyes that seemed to see her, truly see her, for the first time in her life. Dylan couldn't get the Pyrrhian woman out of his mind. Throughout his shift the next day, images of Nylara's startled blue eyes and crimson skin kept distracting him from his duties. He found himself wondering about her, not just her exotic appearance, but her work in botanical sciences and what had brought her to this remote station. "You're staring at that security feed like it's going to sprout legs and dance," remarked Chief Petty Officer Hernandez, sliding into the seat beside him in the monitoring station. Dylan blinked, realizing he'd been gazing blankly at the screen for several minutes. "Just thinking. About that red alien you've been accidentally crossing paths with all morning?" Hernandez grinned, his weathered face crinkling with amusement. "The whole security team has noticed, Commander. You've taken 3 separate detours through the botanical section today." "I have not," Dylan protested, though he knew it was true. He'd found excuses to walk past the hydroponics lab twice and had lingered in the arboretum during his break, hoping for another glimpse of Nylara. Hernandez snorted. "With all due respect, sir, you're about as subtle as a supernova. If you're interested in the lady, just tell her." "It's not that simple," Dylan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She's Pyrrhian. Different culture, different expectations." "Bullshit," Hernandez said bluntly. "One thing I've learned in 20 years of space service, people are people, no matter what color their skin is or how many eyes they've got. If she's giving you the look, and trust me, she was definitely giving you the look in the mess hall earlier, then she's interested." Dylan raised an eyebrow. "The look? You know damn well what look I mean, Commander." Hernandez stood, clapping him on the shoulder. "My shift's over. Don't overthink it. That's an order from an old space dog who's seen more than his fair share of interspecies romances. Sometimes a direct approach is best." As Hernandez departed, Dylan considered his words. Maybe the chief was right. Perhaps he was overcomplicating things. Decision made, Dylan finished his shift and headed to the equipment room. If he was going to make an impression, he might as well look the part. Nylara was cataloging specimens in the arboretum when she sensed someone watching her. Looking up from her datapad, she nearly dropped it when she saw Dylan Summers standing a few meters away, dressed in a sleeveless black tactical suit that showcased his muscular arms and broad shoulders. Her tendrils fluttered involuntarily in response. "Commander Summers," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Can I help you with something?" Dylan approached, his confident stride making her heart race. "I was hoping we could talk, and please call me Dylan." "Of course." Dylan. His name felt intimate on her tongue. "What did you want to discuss?" He gestured to the exotic flora surrounding them. "Your work, for starters. I've been curious about it since our unexpected meeting yesterday." Nylara felt her skin warm with embarrassment. "I'd hoped you might have forgotten that incident." "Not likely," he chuckled, his eyes meeting hers with surprising intensity. "In fact, I've been thinking about it all day." Something in his tone made her tendrils curl with anticipation. They walked together through the arboretum as she explained her research on adaptive cross-species pollination. To her surprise, Dylan asked intelligent questions and seemed genuinely interested in her answers. As they reached a secluded corner filled with luminescent flora from her homeworld, Dylan stopped walking. His expression grew serious as he turned to face her. "You know, you're actually very beautiful," he said softly. Nylara froze, her tendrils going completely still in shock. "What?" "You heard me," Dylan said, his voice gentle but firm. I've noticed how you carry yourself, like you're trying not to be seen, but you should be seen, Nylara. You're striking. You're being kind, she whispered, unable to meet his gaze. But by Piran's standards, I'm inadequate. Not suitable for... She stopped herself, embarrassed. For breeding, Dylan finished, surprising her. I've studied enough xenobiology to know about Piran reproductive customs. And with all due respect to your people's traditions, they're dead wrong about you. Nylara's head snapped up, her blue eyes wide with disbelief. You can't possibly mean that? I absolutely do, he insisted, stepping closer. Where I come from, you'd have admirers lining up around the block. And speaking purely as a human male with functioning eyes, I find you not only attractive, but perfectly suitable as a potential mate. The directness of his statement left her speechless. No one had ever spoken to her this way, with such certainty, such appreciation. Her tendrils curled and uncurled in rapid succession, betraying her emotional turmoil. You don't even know me, she finally managed. Dylan smiled. I'd like to change that. Have dinner with me tonight. Before she could respond, his communication device chimed. He checked it with a frown. Duty calls? Think about it. Nylara nodded, still too stunned to form words. As Dylan walked away, she reached out to steady herself against a nearby planter. His words echoed in her mind. Beautiful, striking, suitable. Could he possibly mean it? Or was this some strange human custom, flattery without intent? Whatever his motivation, one thing was certain. Lieutenant Commander Dylan Summers had just upended her carefully ordered world with a few simple words. And despite her confusion, Nylara found herself hoping desperately that he meant every one of them. Nylara spent more time preparing for dinner than she had for her doctoral defense. She cycled through 4 different outfits before settling on a flowing garment in deep blue that complemented her crimson skin. Traditional Piran fashion emphasized practicality over aesthetics, but tonight she wanted to feel beautiful, the way Dylan had described her. The station's executive dining area was reserved for senior officers and distinguished scientists. When Nylara arrived, Dylan was already waiting, dressed in his formal Earth Defense Force uniform. The crisp black fabric accentuated his broad shoulders, and the silver insignia caught the light as he stood to greet her. You look stunning, he said, his eyes appreciative but respectful. Thank you, she replied, her tendrils curling slightly in pleasure. Your formal attire is quite impressive as well. As they were seated at a private table overlooking the stars, Nylara noticed several curious glances from other diners, both human and alien. Interspecies socializing wasn't uncommon on Helios Station, but romantic encounters still raised eyebrows. I hope I haven't made you uncomfortable by suggesting this venue, Dylan said, noticing her awareness of the attention. Not at all, she assured him, though I admit I'm curious about your interest in me. Humans and Pirhans don't typically connect in this way. Dylan smiled as he poured her a glass of iridescent blue liquid. Pirhan nectar, he explained. I did some research. I'm impressed, she said, taking a sip. The familiar, sweet-tart flavor of home surprised her. Most non-Pirans find our beverages too acidic. I like trying new things, he replied, his eyes holding hers, and challenging assumptions, like the idea that humans and Pirans can't connect. Their conversation flowed easily as they shared their first meal together. Dylan told her about growing up in the Pacific Northwest on Earth, surrounded by towering forests that reminded Nylara of her own homeworld's sacred groves. She described the floating cities of Pyra, where her people had adapted to live above the planet's volatile surface. Our cultures seem quite different on the surface, Nylara observed, yet there are surprising similarities. Like what? Dylan asked, genuinely interested. Both our species value resilience and adaptation. We've both survived hostile environments by using our intelligence rather than brute strength. She hesitated before adding, though I must say, humans seem to possess both in abundance. Dylan laughed. We're not as tough as we look, but we are stubborn. It's practically our defining trait. That in your directness, Nylara added with a small smile. No Piran male would have approached me as you did in the Arboretum. Why not? It's obvious you're exceptional. Nylara's tendrils rippled with emotion. Among my people, reproductive compatibility is determined by specific physical traits. My coloration is too vibrant, my frame too slender for traditional breeding standards. Dylan frowned. That seems limiting. It is, she agreed. Our population has declined for 3 generations because of such rigid criteria. Some progressive factions are pushing for change, but traditions run deep. On Earth, we have a saying, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, Dylan said. What one person finds attractive, another might not, and that's perfectly fine. A wise philosophy, Nilara murmured. Among Pyrans, beauty is defined by consensus, not individual preference. And what about love? Dylan asked, his voice softening. Does that factor into Pyrran partnerships? The question caught her off guard. Love is acknowledged, but secondary to genetic compatibility. Emotional bonds are expected to develop after pairing, not before. That's where humans differ most dramatically, Dylan said, reaching across the table to touch her hand. The contact sent a pleasant warmth spreading up her arm. We tend to lead with our hearts, sometimes against all logic. Is that what you're doing now? She asked boldly, surprising herself. His fingers gently stroked the back of her hand, sending delicious shivers through her body. Maybe. Does that frighten you? No, she admitted. It intrigues me. Their eyes locked, and Nilara felt something shift between them. A boundary crossed, an understanding reached. When Dylan suggested they continue their conversation somewhere more private, she agreed without hesitation. His quarters were larger than hers, befitting his rank, but still modest by military standards. What caught her attention wasn't the space itself, but the personal touches. Physical books on a shelf, a small potted plant, photographs of Earth landscapes. Would you like something to drink? He offered. No, she said softly. I'd like you to tell me more about human courtship rituals. Dylan moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. I could tell you, he said, his voice low and intimate, or I could show you. When his lips met hers, Nilara experienced a sensation entirely new to her species. A kiss. Pyrran mating involved many forms of touch, but mouth-to-mouth contact was not among them. The novel intimacy sent waves of pleasure cascading through her body, her tendrils entwining instinctively around his shoulders. What followed was a discovery of differences and similarities between their species. Where to touch, how to please, the rhythm of desire that transcended biological distinctions. Their coming together was both foreign and familiar, a dance of instinct and adaptation that left them both breathless and transformed. Afterward, as they lay entwined, Nilara marveled at how natural it felt to be with him, despite all the biological and cultural differences between them. What are you thinking? Dylan asked, tracing patterns on her crimson skin. That perhaps my people's definition of breeding material needs revision, she replied with newfound confidence, and that humans have much to teach us about following one's heart. Dylan smiled against her shoulder. And Pyrrans have much to teach humans about breaking free from limiting perspectives. I've never experienced anything like this. In that moment, Nilara realized that Dylan had given her more than physical pleasure or flattering words. He had offered her a new way of seeing herself, beyond the constraints of her culture's narrow definitions. For the first time in her life, she felt not just accepted, but celebrated for exactly who she was. 6 weeks after their first night together, Nilara stared at the medical scanner in disbelief. She ran the diagnostic again, certain there must be an error. The results remained unchanged. This can't be right, she whispered to the empty lab. According to every xenobiological study ever conducted, humans and Pyrrans were genetically incompatible for reproduction. Their DNA structures were fundamentally different, humans with their double helix and Pyrrans with their triple-strand configuration. Cross-species fertilization should have been impossible, yet the evidence before her was undeniable. The scanner detected a developing embryo with a unique genetic signature, part human, part Pyrran. Nilara's tendrils trembled as she contemplated the implications. In the 6 weeks since their first intimate encounter, she and Dylan had grown closer, spending most nights together and many off-duty hours exploring each other's cultures, bodies, and minds. What had begun as curiosity and attraction had deepened into something more profound, something she hesitated to name, though humans seem to use the word love quite freely. But this development changed everything. She hadn't noticed the symptoms at first, attributing her fatigue to long research hours and her changed appetite to sampling too much human cuisine. But when her tendrils began displaying color variations, a phenomenon typically associated with Piran pregnancy, she'd finally run the test. Dr. Davari? Her assistant's voice came through the lab's communication system. Commander Summers is here to see you. Nylara quickly deactivated the scanner. Send him in, please. Dylan entered with a smile that faded when he saw her expression. What's wrong? She gestured for him to close the door. When they were alone, she took a deep breath. I've discovered something unexpected. His brow furrowed with concern. Are you all right? I'm pregnant, she said simply, watching his face carefully. Dylan froze, his expression cycling through shock, confusion, and disbelief. But that's... The xenobiologist said, impossible. Yes. Nylara reactivated the scanner, showing him the results. Apparently they were wrong. Dylan stared at the display, then back at her. You're sure? I've run the test 3 times, she confirmed. The embryo has genetic markers from both our species. It appears to be developing normally, though I'll need more specialized equipment for a comprehensive analysis. Dylan ran a hand through his hair, his expression unreadable. I don't know what to say. Nylara's tendrils drooped slightly. I understand if this is overwhelming. It was never supposed to happen. You have no obligation. Stop, Dylan interrupted, stepping closer and taking her hands in his. I'm shocked, yes. But Nylara, do you understand what this means? She blinked, confused by his intensity. That our species are more compatible than previously thought? It means, he said, a slow smile spreading across his face, that everything you were told about not being breeding material was absolutely categorically wrong. You're not just capable of reproduction. You've achieved something no Piran has ever done before. His perspective hadn't occurred to her. Throughout her life, she'd internalized her people's judgment that she was genetically inadequate. Now, not only had she conceived, but she'd done so with a member of another species, something considered biologically impossible. I hadn't thought of it that way, she admitted, her tendrils beginning to curl with cautious hope. Of course you hadn't, Dylan said gently. You've spent your whole life believing what others told you about your worth. He placed a hand on her abdomen, his touch reverent. But this little miracle proves them all wrong. Nylara covered his hand with hers. You're not upset. Surprised? Absolutely. Terrified? A little. His eyes met hers, warm and sincere. But upset, number. How could I be upset about creating something extraordinary with the woman I've fallen in love with? The declaration caught her off guard. Pirans rarely spoke of love so directly, especially not in relation to reproduction. You love me. I do, he said without hesitation. I think I started falling for you the moment you walked in on me changing and looked at me like I was the most fascinating creature you'd ever seen. Nylara laughed, her tendrils flushing a deeper red with pleasure. You were. You still are. Dylan pulled her into an embrace, his solid warmth reassuring against the uncertainty she felt. We'll figure this out together. I promise. As she relaxed into his arms, Nylara realized that this impossible pregnancy was the perfect embodiment of their relationship. Defying expectations, crossing boundaries, creating something new and unprecedented from the union of different worlds. There will be challenges, she warned, thinking of how both their communities might react. The Piran Reproductive Council will want to study this development extensively, and your military superiors. Let them try to interfere, Dylan said with the characteristic human determination that had first attracted her to him. This is our child, our future. No one gets to dictate what that looks like except us. His confidence bolstered her own. Perhaps this was the true gift humans brought to the galaxy. Not just their technological innovations or military prowess, but their unshakable belief that limitations existed to be overcome, that rules could be rewritten, that the impossible was merely improbable until proven otherwise. My mother always said I was too strange to continue our family line, Nylara mused, a new sense of pride replacing her lifelong shame. I wonder what she'll say when she learns I'm expanding it in ways no one ever imagined possible. Dylan grinned. I'd pay good credits to see her face. As they stood together, contemplating their unexpected future, Nylara felt a profound shift in her self-perception. The very traits that had marked her as unsuitable by Piran standards. Her unique coloration, her slender frame, her tendency toward independent thinking, had perhaps been the very qualities that made this miraculous conception possible. She wasn't deficient after all. She was evolutionary. Absolutely fascinating, Dr. Elias Peterson murmured, studying the holographic display of Nylara's scan results. The human xenobiologist had been summoned from the medical wing after Dylan and Nylara agreed they needed specialized expertise. By all conventional understanding, this should be impossible. Nylara sat on the examination table, her tendrils shifting nervously as 3 different specialists, human, Piran, and Andorian, circled around her like scientists examining a rare specimen, which she supposed she had become. Yet here we are, Dylan said firmly, standing protectively at her side. His hand rested on her shoulder, a silent reminder that she wasn't facing this scrutiny alone. Dr. Vixora, the Piran specialist, adjusted her diagnostic equipment with trembling fingers. Unlike Nylara's vibrant crimson, Vexora's skin was a muted orange, the proper shade for breeding eligibility according to traditional standards. The embryo appears to be developing a triple helix DNA structure, but with human genetic markers incorporated throughout, Vexora reported, her voice tinged with barely concealed awe. It's as if the Piran genetic template is adapting the human DNA rather than rejecting it. Could this be unique to Nylara's physiology, Dylan asked. Dr. Peterson stroked his chin thoughtfully. Possibly. We've always focused on the incompatibilities between species, not potential adaptations. Perhaps, Vexora suggested hesitantly, what we've classified as non-standard Piran traits are actually evolutionary advantages we've been suppressing through our breeding protocols. The implication hung in the air. For generations, Pirans had carefully controlled reproduction based on rigid physical standards, believing they were preserving genetic purity. What if they had actually been preventing beneficial evolution? I'd like to run a comparative analysis of your genetic markers against our population database, Vexora said to Nylara. With your permission, of course. Will these tests pose any risk to the embryo? Dylan interjected before Nylara could respond. None whatsoever, Dr. Peterson assured them. Everything we need can be gathered from standard scans. Nylara appreciated Dylan's protective instinct, but placed a calming hand on his arm. I want to understand this as much as they do, she told him softly. Then to the specialist, you have my permission. The next few hours were a blur of tests, questions, and increasingly excited scientific discussions. By the time they finished, Nylara was exhausted but fascinated by what they'd discovered. Your results are remarkable, Dr. Peterson explained as they gathered in his office afterward. Nylara possesses a genetic variation present in less than 2% of Pirans, a variation that appears to enable adaptive compatibility with certain non-Piran DNA structures, including human DNA, Dylan clarified. Precisely, Vexora confirmed, her professional demeanor slipping to reveal genuine excitement. This variation has been classified as a deviation from the ideal Piran genome, but our preliminary analysis suggests it's actually an evolutionary advancement. Nylara's tendrils curled with vindication. So, the very traits that made me unsuitable by traditional standards may represent the future of your species, Dr. Peterson finished. Genetic diversity is the cornerstone of evolutionary success. Humans learned this lesson painfully through our own history of eugenics and genetic discrimination. Dylan squeezed her hand. I told you you were extraordinary. The Andorian specialist, who had been quietly analyzing data, finally spoke up. There's more. The embryo's development suggests unprecedented genetic stability. If this pregnancy proceeds normally, the child will likely possess enhanced adaptive capabilities from both parent species. Enhanced how? Dylan asked. Impossible to predict precisely, the blue-skinned alien replied, but potentially significant. Hybrid vigor is a well-documented phenomenon across compatible species. Nylara placed a protective hand over her abdomen, overwhelmed by the implications. Her child, their child, might represent not just a personal miracle, but a scientific breakthrough with far-reaching consequences. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Dr. Peterson exchanged glances with his colleagues. "With your consent, we'd like to document this case for the scientific community. It could revolutionize our understanding of interspecies compatibility and potentially challenge centuries of Purine reproductive doctrine," Vixora added, her tone suggesting she found this prospect more exciting than troubling. Dylan's expression hardened slightly. "Nylara is not a research subject. She's a person carrying our child." "Of course," Dr. Peterson agreed quickly. "Any participation would be entirely on your terms with full privacy protections." Nylara considered the situation. Throughout her life, she'd been made to feel deficient because of her non-standard traits. Now, those same characteristics had enabled something miraculous. Perhaps sharing their story could help others like her, Purines who didn't fit the traditional mold, who might have compatible potential with other species that had never been explored. "I'm willing to participate in your research," she decided, under certain conditions. "Our child's welfare comes first, and I want access to all findings. Nothing kept classified or restricted." "Agreed," Dr. Peterson said without hesitation. As they left the medical wing, Dylan pulled Nylara into a quiet alcove, his expression serious. "Are you sure about this? Once the scientific community gets involved, controlling the narrative becomes difficult." Nylara's tendrils swayed gently as she considered his concern. "I spent my entire life believing I was inadequate, that I failed to meet some arbitrary standard of genetic worthiness. If our experience can challenge those standards and help others see themselves differently," she placed his hand on her abdomen, "then our child will have changed the universe before even being born." Dylan's face softened with pride. "You're amazing, you know that? Most people would be overwhelmed by all this, but you're already thinking about how to use it to help others." "I learned that from you," she admitted. "Humans have this remarkable ability to find opportunity in chaos, to transform challenges into advantages." She leaned up to kiss him softly. "It's why I fell in love with you." As they walked back to their quarters, Nylara noticed the subtle changes in how station personnel regarded her. Word traveled quickly in the closed environment of a space station, where once she had moved through corridors largely unnoticed. Now she received curious glances, respectful nods, even congratulatory smiles from strangers. For the first time in her life, Nylara walked with her head held high, her vibrant crimson skin and slender frame no longer sources of shame, but badges of evolutionary distinction. The transformation wasn't just in how others saw her, it was in how she saw herself. She wasn't just breeding material after all, she was evolutionary potential personified. "Lieutenant Commander Summers, please report to Admiral Keller's office immediately." The summons came just as Dylan was reviewing security protocols for the upcoming diplomatic visit. News of Nylara's unprecedented pregnancy had spread beyond Helios Station, attracting attention from both Earth Defense Force Command and the Purine High Council. "Acknowledged," Dylan replied, straightening his uniform. He'd been expecting this call. Admiral Keller was a career military man with a reputation for pragmatism. His office reflected his personality, orderly, functional, and devoid of personal touches, except for a single holographic image of Earth as seen from lunar orbit. "Commander Summers," O'Keller greeted him, gesturing to a chair. "I've just finished reviewing Dr. Peterson's preliminary report on your unique situation." Dylan sat at attention. Yes, sir. "Eddie Summers, this isn't a disciplinary meeting." The Admiral's stern expression softened slightly. "In fact, quite the opposite. Your relationship with Dr. Taveri has inadvertently created a diplomatic and scientific breakthrough of considerable significance." "Thank you, sir. Though I can't take credit for the scientific aspects," Keller chuckled. "No false modesty needed, Commander. We both know your contribution was essential." He tapped his console, bringing up a holographic display. "I've received a communique from Earth Defense Force headquarters. They're sending a special envoy to assess the situation, and additionally, the Purine High Council is dispatching Counselor Maven to represent their interests." Dylan tensed. "Their interests, sir?" "Don't worry, Commander. This station operates under Earth jurisdiction. Dr. Taveri and your unborn child are protected by our laws. Keller leaned forward. That said, this situation presents both opportunity and challenge. The Pirans have been reluctant allies at best. Your child could become a powerful symbol of human-Piran cooperation. With all due respect, Admiral, my child isn't a political tool. Of course not, Keller agreed smoothly. But perception matters in interspecies relations. Which brings me to my next point. He slid a data chip across the desk. These are your new quarters assignment and updated security clearance. The family housing section has better environmental controls and medical proximity. Dylan picked up the chip, surprised. Family housing, sir? Standard procedure for expecting officers, Keller said matter-of-factly. Though I admit we've had to adapt some protocols for your particular circumstances. Thank you, sir. One more thing, Keller added. Effective immediately, you're appointed as liaison to the Piran delegation during Counselor Maven's visit. Your unique perspective makes you ideal for the position. Dylan recognized the assignment for what it was, both an acknowledgement of his situation and a strategic placement. Understood, sir. Dismissed, Commander. And Keller hesitated, then added with unexpected warmth, Congratulations. Nilara was arranging her botanical specimens when the station's communication system chimed. Dr. Taveri, please report to Director Halsey's office. Her tendrils quivered with apprehension as she made her way to the administrative section. Unlike Dylan, who seemed to navigate institutional hierarchies with ease, Nilara had always preferred the company of plants to bureaucrats. Director Halsey, the civilian administrator of Helios Station's scientific division, greeted her with unexpected enthusiasm. Dr. Taveri, please sit down. Can I offer you refreshment? Piran nectar, perhaps? I've had some imported specially. No, thank you, Nilara replied cautiously, settling into a chair designed for the human proportions. I'll get straight to the point, Halsey said, practically vibrating with excitement. Your pregnancy has attracted significant attention from the highest levels of both human and Piratian scientific communities. The Interspecies Medical Journal wants to publish a special edition featuring your case study. I see, Nilara said carefully. Additionally, Halsey continued, I've received notification that Counselor Maven of the Pirahan High Council will be arriving within the week to evaluate the situation personally. Nilara's tendrils went rigid with shock. Counselor Maven? The head of the Reproductive Doctrine Committee? The very same, Halsey confirmed. This is unprecedented, Doctor. Taveri, no member of the High Council has ever visited a human station before. Nilara felt a cold dread settling in her stomach. Counselor Maven was the most conservative voice on the High Council, known for her strict enforcement of traditional breeding protocols. Her arrival could only mean trouble. I understand this might be overwhelming, Halsey said, misinterpreting her silence as awe rather than apprehension. That's why we're implementing special accommodations for you immediately. Your research schedule will be adjusted to account for your condition, and you'll be relocated to the station's family section. Family section? Nilara echoed. Yes, adjacent to Commander Summers' new quarters. I understand humans prefer proximity during reproduction cycles. Halsey smiled benignly. We want to honor both your cultural practices during this historic time. That evening, Dylan and Nilara met in their new quarters, a spacious suite designed for families, with separate climate controls for each section to accommodate their different physiological needs. They've thought of everything, Dylan observed, examining the adaptive furniture that could adjust to both human and Piran ergonomics. Except asking what we actually wanted, Nilara replied, her tendrils swaying with agitation. Dylan, do you know who Counselor Maven is? He nodded grimly. Admiral Keller briefed me. She's essentially the enforcer of the same reproductive doctrines that labeled you unsuitable. She's more than that, Nilara said, pacing the room. She's the architect of the modern Piran breeding program. Her policies have reduced our population by 20% over the last 3 generations in pursuit of genetic purity. Dylan's jaw tightened. And now she's coming here to evaluate me, us personally. Nilara stopped pacing and turned to him, her blue eyes wide with worry. What if she tries to claim jurisdiction over our child? Piran law gives the Reproductive Council authority over all Pirahan offspring. Dylan crossed the room in 3 strides, taking her hands in his. That won't happen. Earth Defense Force regulations are clear. Children born to service members fall under Earth protection, regardless of species. But our child is unprecedented, Nylara argued. There's no legal precedent for a human-Piran hybrid. Then we'll set the precedent, Dylan said firmly, pulling her into his arms. Together. As she leaned against his solid warmth, Nylara marveled at the human capacity for confidence in the face of uncertainty. Where Pirans sought stability through rigid tradition, humans seemed to thrive on breaking new ground, establishing new frontiers. How can you be so sure, she whispered against his chest. Because I've seen what happens when humans decide something matters, he said simply. We've crossed galaxies, survived wars, rebuilt from ashes, protecting our family. That's nothing compared to what humanity has already accomplished. His words, spoken with such certainty, kindled something within her, a spark of the same determination that had carried humans from their single planet to become a galactic power in just a few centuries. Our family, she repeated, the phrase still new and wondrous on her tongue. Her tendrils curled with pleasure as she looked up at him. I like how that sounds. Dylan smiled, stroking her tendrils in the way he'd learned she loved. So do I. As they settled into their new home, preparing for the challenges ahead, Nylara realized that the greatest gift Dylan had given her wasn't just his child or even his love. It was his unshakable human confidence that limitations existed only to be overcome. Counselor Maven's arrival on Helios Station was marked by a ceremony that seemed excessive even by Piran standards. A delegation of 12 attendants accompanied her, each dressed in formal robes that signified their rank within the reproductive council hierarchy. Their procession through the station's main concourse drew stares from personnel of all species. Dylan stood at attention in his dress uniform, representing Earth Defense Force as the official liaison. Despite the formality of the occasion, his mind was on Nylara, who stood several paces behind him with the scientific delegation. Her pregnancy was now visible, a subtle fullness to her slender frame and a distinctive iridescent quality to her crimson skin that, according to Dr. Vexora, was unique to Piran gestational physiology. Counselor Maven herself cut an imposing figure. Taller than most Pirans, with skin the exact shade of burnt orange that their society deemed ideal, she carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to absolute authority. Her tendrils were elaborately styled in traditional braids that signified her high status. Counselor Maven, Admiral Keller greeted her. Helios Station welcomes you and your delegation. We're honored by your presence. Maven inclined her head slightly. The honor is mutual, Admiral. The Piran High Council recognizes the significance of recent developments aboard your station. Her gaze swept the assembled officials until it landed on Nylara. Something flickered in her expression, surprise perhaps, or calculation. Dr. Tavari, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the concourse. You have become quite the topic of discussion on Pier High. Nylara stepped forward, her tendrils steady despite what Dylan knew must be intense anxiety. Counselor, I am honored by your interest in my research. Your research? Maven raised a brow ridge. I was referring to your unprecedented reproductive situation. A murmur ran through the assembled crowd. Though news of Nylara's pregnancy had spread throughout the station, hearing it addressed so directly by a high-ranking official made it suddenly, publicly real. Admiral Keller smoothly intervened. We've prepared a full briefing on all aspects of this scientific breakthrough. Lieutenant Commander Summers will serve as your liaison during your stay. Maven's gaze shifted to Dylan, assessing him with undisguised interest. The human male responsible for this breakthrough. Yes, I look forward to our discussions, Commander. The formal reception that followed was tense with unspoken agendas. Dylan remained vigilant, positioned always between Nylara and the Piran delegation. He noticed how Counselor Maven observed their interactions, missing nothing. When the reception concluded, Dylan escorted the counselor to her assigned quarters as protocol demanded. Your station is impressive, Commander, Maven remarked as they walked. Though I notice the environmental settings favor human physiology. We can adjust them to Piran preferences in your quarters and meeting areas, Dylan offered. Thoughtful, but unnecessary. Adaptation is valuable. She paused, turning to face him directly. Speaking of adaptation, I'm curious about your relationship with Dr. Tiveri. What attracted you to a female so clearly unsuited for reproduction by parent standards? The bluntness of the question caught Dylan off guard, but he maintained his diplomatic composure. With respect, counselor, Puritan reproductive standards aren't relevant to human attraction. I found Nalara beautiful from our first meeting. Fascinating, Maven murmured. Humans place such emphasis on individual preference rather than collective benefit. We believe diversity strengthens us, Dylan replied. Our history has taught us that standardizing any aspect of humanity leads to stagnation. A perspective worth considering, Maven said, though her tone suggested skepticism. Tomorrow I will require a private audience with Dr. Tiveri. Alone, Dylan tensed. As her partner and the father of her child, I would prefer to be present. I'm sure you would, Maven said coolly. However, this is a matter of Pyrran internal affairs. The Reproductive Council has jurisdiction over all Pyrran reproductive matters. With respect, counselor, my child is as much human as Pyrran. Earth Defense Force regulations are clear regarding the status of children born to service members. Maven's tendrils shifted in what Dylan recognized as amusement. An interesting legal question, isn't it? A precedent-setting case, one might say. She resumed walking. I look forward to resolving it during my visit. She wants to claim our baby for the Reproductive Council, Nylara said that night, pacing their quarters. I knew this would happen. Dylan watched her, concerned by the agitation visible in her rapidly moving tendrils. She can try, but she won't succeed. You don't understand Pyrran politics, Nylara insisted. The Reproductive Council has absolute authority over breeding matters. They could declare me an unfit mother based on my genetic deviations and claim custody of our child for the betterment of the species. Not on this station, Dylan said firmly. Not under Earth jurisdiction. And if they recall me to Pyrrha, as a citizen, I would be legally obligated to comply. Dylan crossed to her, taking her hands in his. Then we'll find another solution. I won't let them separate us. The fierce protectiveness in his voice calmed her somewhat. This was the human quality that had first drawn her to him. This unwavering determination in the face of seemingly immovable obstacles. I have to meet with her tomorrow, Nalara said, alone. I don't like it. Neither do I, but refusing would only strengthen her position. Nalara's tendrils curled around his wrists in the Purran gesture of intimate trust. I need to face her, Dylan, for our child, for myself. He pulled her close, his warmth a comfort against the chill of uncertainty. You're stronger than she knows. Remind her that you've already proven every Pyrran reproductive doctrine wrong. Nalara smiled against his chest. I have, haven't I? Spectacularly, he agreed, tilting her face up to his. You're not just breeding material, Nylara. You're evolutionary destiny. Their kiss deepened, passion kindled by the protective instinct that had grown even stronger since the confirmation of her pregnancy. In the privacy of their quarters, they reaffirmed their connection in the most primal way, their bodies speaking a language that transcended species differences. Later, as they lay entwined, Nalara traced the contours of Dylan's face. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever she says, know that you've given me something no one else could. Our child, he murmured sleepily. More than that, she said softly. You gave me the courage to see myself as worthy. Not by Pyrran standards or human ones, but by my own. As she drifted to sleep in his arms, Nalara felt a new resolve forming. Tomorrow she would face Counselor Maven not as the unsuitable specimen she'd been labeled all her life, but as a woman who had defied an entire species' reproductive doctrine. A woman who carried the future within her. A woman who, against all odds and expectations, had proven herself to be the most suitable breeding material of all. Dylan paced outside the conference room where Nalara and Counselor Maven had been meeting for over 2 hours. Despite his official role as liaison, he'd been explicitly barred from this particular discussion, a point Maven had insisted upon with Admiral Keller's reluctant approval. You'll wear a hole in the deck plating, Chief Hernandez remarked, approaching with 2 steaming cups. He handed one to Dylan. Coffee, you look like you need it. Thanks, Dylan accepted the cup gratefully. Any word from inside? Hernandez shook his head. Nothing official, but my wife works in communications. and she says there's been an uptick in transmissions between the counselor's ship and Pyrrha. Whatever they're discussing in there, it's big enough to warrant real-time updates to the High Council. Dylan's stomach tightened. That doesn't sound promising. Maybe, maybe not. Hernandez leaned against the wall. You know, Commander, in 20 years of service, I've seen humans navigate some impossible situations. We have a knack for finding the third option when everyone else only sees two. Before Dylan could respond, the conference room door slid open. Nilara emerged, her tendrils unnaturally still, a sign of extreme emotional control that Dylan had learned to recognize. Behind her came Counselor Maven, flanked by two aides. Commander Summers, Maven acknowledged him with a curt nod. I require an immediate audience with Admiral Keller. The Pyrrhan High Council has reached a decision regarding Dr. DeVary's case. Dylan moved to Nilara's side. What decision? The Reproductive Council has determined that the unprecedented nature of this pregnancy constitutes a matter of Pyrrhan national security. Maven stated, Dr. Taveri is ordered to return to Pyrrha for the duration of her gestation and delivery, where appropriate monitoring can be conducted. That's not happening, Dylan said flatly. Maven's tendrils shifted in what might have been amusement. This isn't a request, Commander. It's a directive from the highest authority in Pyrrhan government. Nilara is under Earth Defense Force protection as my partner, Dylan countered, and our child is genetically Pyrrhan, Maven interrupted. By our laws, that places the offspring under Reproductive Council jurisdiction. And genetically human, Dylan retorted. By our laws, that places the child under Earth jurisdiction as the offspring of an EDF officer. Maven's expression hardened. This standoff will be resolved by the appropriate authorities. I suggest you prepare for departure, Doctor. Taveri, we leave tomorrow. As Maven and her aides departed toward the Admiral's office, Dylan turned to Nilara. What happened in there? She made it clear that the Council views our child as Pyrrhan property, Nilara said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. A genetic anomaly to be studied and potentially replicated under controlled conditions. Dylan's jaw clenched. They're not taking you anywhere. Dylan, the Reproductive Council has extensive authority. If I refuse a direct order, then we'll find another way, he insisted, an idea already forming in his mind. Come with me. Admiral Keller looked up from his desk as Dylan and Nilara entered his office, moments after Counselor Maven had departed. Commander Summers, I was about to summon you, Keller said, his expression grave. We have a diplomatic situation developing. Yes, sir. That's why we're here. Dylan stood at attention. I'd like to request an emergency application of Regulation 7B. Keller's eyebrows rose. The interspecies marriage provision? That's an unusual request, Commander. Unusual circumstances, sir. Dylan glanced at Nilara, who looked equally surprised by his strategy. Regulation 7B clearly states that non-human spouses of Earth Defense Force personnel are granted full protection under Earth law, including any offspring of the Union. I'm familiar with the regulation, Keller said carefully. It was designed primarily for diplomatic marriages, not personal relationships. The language doesn't specify intent, sir. Only legal status. Dylan held the Admiral's gaze steadily. And it supersedes any extradition request from non-allied powers. Keller leaned back, studying them both. Counselor Maven has invoked Pyrrhan national security protocols. This could escalate into a diplomatic incident. With respect, sir, it already is one, Dylan replied. The question is whether Earth Defense Force will protect its own or capitulate to external pressure. A hint of a smile touched Keller's lips. You've done your homework, Commander. I protect what's mine, sir. Keller nodded slowly. Very well, as station commander, I'm authorized to perform the ceremony immediately under emergency provisions. He activated his communication panel. Lieutenant Hayes prepared the necessary documentation for an emergency application of Regulation 7B and informed Counselor Maven that her presence is requested for an important announcement. 1 hour later, in the station's observation lounge overlooking the stars, Dylan and Nilara stood before Admiral Keller. A hastily assembled group of witnesses included Chief Hernandez, Dr. Peterson, and several other station personnel who had become friends. Counselor Maven and her delegation stood to one side, their expressions ranging from confusion to outrage. By the authority vested in me by Earth Defense Force Command, Admiral Keller intoned, I am pleased to officiate this union between Lieutenant Commander Dylan Summers and Dr. Nylara Tavari. Maven stepped forward. This is an obvious attempt to circumvent Piran authority. This is a legal marriage under Earth law, Keller corrected her smoothly. And as you're aware, Counselor, the Galactic Concordat of 2187 recognizes the validity of all legal unions performed under sovereign jurisdiction, regardless of species composition. The Piran High Council will protest this manipulation of regulations, Maven insisted. They're welcome to file a formal complaint, Keller replied. In the meantime, Dr. Tiveri Summers and her unborn child are legally under Earth protection as the spouse and offspring of an Earth Defense Force officer. Any attempt to remove them from this station without consent would constitute an act of hostility against Earth. Maven's tendrils writhed with barely contained fury, but she was too skilled a politician to lose control publicly. This matter is not concluded, Admiral. Perhaps not, Keller agreed, but for now, I believe we have a ceremony to complete. As Maven and her delegation withdrew to the back of the room, Dylan turned to Nylara, taking her hands in his. I know this wasn't how we planned things, he said softly, but I meant to ask you anyway. Just not with an audience? Nylara's tendrils curled with emotion. You're solving an interstellar diplomatic crisis and proposing marriage simultaneously. How very human of you. Dylan grinned. Efficiency is one of our better traits. Along with adaptability, determination, and a complete disregard for impossible odds, she added, her blue eyes shining. Yes, Dylan Summers, I will marry you, for diplomatic reasons and because I love you. Their vows were simple, a blend of human and Piran traditions. When Admiral Keller pronounced them legally united, Dylan kissed Nylara in the human custom while her tendrils entwined with his fingers in the Piran gesture of lifelong commitment. Across the room, Dr. Vexora approached Counselor Maven. An elegant solution, wouldn't you agree, Counselor? The human found the third option. A temporary measure, Maven replied stiffly. Perhaps, Vexora conceded. Or perhaps the beginning of something new. After all, isn't that what evolution is about? Finding new paths forward when the old ones lead to extinction? 6 months later, Lara lay in the medical bay, exhausted but radiant. In her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, their son slept peacefully, his skin a unique blend of human and Piran tones, small tendrils already forming around his delicate face. He's perfect, Dylan whispered, sitting beside them on the bed, just like his mother. Perfect because he's unique, Nylara corrected him, stroking the baby's cheek. Not despite it. The door slid open, admitting Dr. Peterson and, surprisingly, Counselor Maven, who had returned to Helios Station for the birth after months of negotiations between Earth and Pyrrha. The first human Piran child, Maven observed, approaching the bed. May I? After a hesitant glance at Dylan, Nylara nodded. Maven leaned closer, studying the infant with undisguised fascination. The Reproductive Council has officially recognized your union and offspring, she announced. Moreover, we have revised our classification of genetic variants. Your genetic profile, Dr. Tiveri Summers, has been reclassified from unsuitable to evolutionarily advantageous. Nylara's tendrils curled in astonishment. That's, unprecedented. As is your son, Maven replied. Sometimes evolution requires us to reconsider our definitions of suitability. She straightened, her formal demeanor returning. I'll leave you to your family. The official documentation will be transmitted to Admiral Keller. After she departed, Dylan shook his head in amazement. Did that just happen? Humans aren't the only ones who can adapt, Nylara said with a smile, though you certainly showed us how it's done. As their son stirred in her arms, Nylara marveled at how far she had come from that embarrassed woman who had accidentally walked in on a changing human male. From believing herself unsuitable for reproduction to creating a child who would change the course of two species' understanding of genetic potential. What shall we name him? Dylan asked, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. Nylara considered. In Piran tradition, names should reflect potential. What do you think of Theron? It means one who bridges worlds. Theron Summers. Dylan tested the name, smiling as the baby gripped his finger. perfect for a son who's already bridged the impossible. As they sat together, a family created against all biological odds and diplomatic obstacles, Nilara reflected on the journey that had brought them here. It had begun with a simple human compliment, "You're actually very beautiful." Words that had challenged everything she'd been taught to believe about herself. Those words had changed everything, not just for her, but potentially for generations of parents to come. Because of them, she had discovered that being breeding material wasn't about conforming to arbitrary standards. And it was about having the courage to create something new, something unprecedented, something perfect in its uniqueness, just like their son.